A woman was mocked by her ex-husband during a family dinner. But a phone call changed everything. The envelope arrived on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon, slipped beneath the door of Hannah's modest apartment like a ghost from her past. The embossed gold letters read, "Dylan and Ashley Caldwell cordially invite you," and her hands trembled slightly as she read the rest. It was a formal dinner, hosted at Dylan's newly purchased suburban mansion. The irony made her stomach tighten. The man who once said her presence embarrassed him in front of clients was now inviting her back into his orbit. No explanation. No personal note. Just polished ink and instructions for attire, date, and location. She sat on the worn fabric of her couch, the invitation lying like a dare in her lap. It had been 6 years since the divorce. 6 years since she packed her things into the backseat of her dented car while he watched, arms crossed, saying nothing. She never looked back, not even once. Why would he invite her now? Was it pity? A trap? A cruel joke orchestrated by a man who had once made her feel so small that she forgot she ever had dreams of her own? The thought twisted her insides. She placed the invitation on the table and stared at it in silence, as if it might confess its true intentions if she waited long enough. Later that night, unable to sleep, Hannah climbed onto a chair in her hallway closet and pulled down the weathered cardboard box marked only with the word before. Inside were remnants of a life she had locked away, photographs of her and Dylan in their early 20s, tickets to jazz shows they couldn't afford, napkins with messy ink sketches from nights at the diner. One picture showed them on their first anniversary, his arm draped loosely around her shoulders, her eyes filled with that naive sparkle that believed love could conquer anything. As she sifted through each memory, she was reminded of how gradual Dylan's coldness had been. At first, it was in the comments. "You wouldn't understand, you're not from my world." Later, it became the looks, the ones filled with disdain when she talked too loudly at corporate events, or mispronounced the name of one of his associates. Toward the end, it turned into long silences and door slams, until eventually, he was gone. His absence became the most consistent thing in her life. Yet tonight, those same hands that had boxed up that life now trembled, wondering whether to step back into the space where it all began, even if just for one evening. Their marriage had started like most fairy tales, full of promises whispered in cheap apartments and laughter over instant noodles. Hannah was still in culinary school when she met Dylan, who was already climbing the corporate ladder with a law degree and an ego to match. At first, he found her chaotic spirit charming. "You're the spark I didn't know I needed," he had told her once. But over time, that spark became something he tried to extinguish with criticism, control, and silence. He hated that she chose waitressing after graduation instead of pursuing a marketing job at his friend's firm. "You're wasting your life," he told her, more than once, with eyes that didn't bother to hide his shame. The worst moment, the one that still made her ears burn, came during a fundraiser dinner for one of his clients. She had worn a simple black dress and tried her best to engage in the conversations swirling around her, though the jargon flew over her head like foreign birds. That night, in the car on the way home, he snapped. "Don't ever speak about wine pairings again. You embarrassed me in front of people who matter." Her mouth opened, then closed. The Hannah who once debated passionately had disappeared long ago. In her place stood a woman who nodded and stared out the window, measuring her worth by the reflection of her silence in the glass. The day she found the divorce papers, they were sitting on the kitchen counter beside a bottle of red wine and a half-eaten steak Dylan had brought home for himself. She had just finished a double shift and her feet ached, her uniform still stained with black coffee from a rude customer. The man who once cooked her pancakes on Sundays now couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone when she walked in. "It's not working," he said without emotion, as if their marriage were a defective appliance. She didn't cry. Not then. She picked up the papers, read the lines coldly, and said the only thing she could manage, "I know." He moved out within a week, leaving her with a one-bedroom apartment, a leaky bathroom sink, and a heart that pulsed with quiet devastation. The silence in the space became heavier than his insults. She tried to fill it with music, with books, with late-night reruns of shows they once watched together. But none of it worked. The first year after he left, she could barely look at herself in the mirror. Who was this woman who let herself be erased? The Hannah who once wanted to open her own cafe had been buried beneath years of being told she wasn't enough. But something in her had refused to die, something that began to stir in the silence. After Dylan left, she threw herself into her work. The diner became her refuge. Each morning, she opened the doors before sunrise, cleaned tables with deliberate care, and welcomed regulars by name. She memorized every order, every allergy, every preferred booth. People called her the heartbeat of Maple and Maine. Yet even with all that, the whispers from coworkers lingered, quiet snickers about the woman who had been married to a rising attorney and now scraped syrup off laminated menus. What happened to her? One server asked another, not knowing Hannah could hear. Didn't she used to be someone? But Hannah learned to wear her invisibility like armor. Let them talk. Let them wonder. They didn't see the late nights she spent reading books on small business, the way she saved every spare dollar in a shoebox under her bed, or the journal she kept filled with menu ideas and cafe layouts. She wasn't ready yet, but she was building something. Quietly. Slowly. Every shift behind the counter, every scraped plate, every insult from those who thought she was beneath them, all of it was fuel. She didn't know it yet, but every step forward would become the very foundation of a comeback that no one, especially Dylan, would see coming. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a woman sat alone in the far corner booth of the diner. She was older, well-dressed in a way that felt elegant without trying too hard. Hannah noticed her because, unlike most customers, she didn't fidget with a phone or a menu. She just watched, calm, observant. When Hannah approached, the woman smiled gently and asked for tea and apple pie, then paused. "You carry yourself like someone who's lived through something heavy," she said softly. Hannah froze. Most people never saw her that clearly. Over the next week, the woman came back 3 times. Her name was Evelyn. She was quiet, respectful, always tipping more than necessary, and she never asked invasive questions. Instead, she complimented Hannah's professionalism, the way she handled chaos with grace, the way she remembered everyone's name. "You don't belong behind that counter forever," she said once, laying down her spoon. "Would you consider something different?" Hannah blinked, unsure how to answer. No one had offered her anything in a long time, not even the dignity of believing she could want more. When Evelyn finally explained what she meant, it was over black coffee and the remnants of another pie. "I run a small consulting firm," she said. "We're expanding. I could use someone who actually listens, who knows how to read people, who isn't afraid of pressure." Hannah blinked, surprised. "But I don't have any corporate experience," she replied quickly. Evelyn smiled, as if she'd been expecting that answer. "Neither did I when I started. But you have intuition. You know how to solve problems when chaos hits. That's what I need." Hannah hesitated. The offer sounded surreal, like something that belonged to another life, someone else's life. But Evelyn's tone was sincere, and more than that, Hannah saw no pity in her eyes. "Only belief. Start part-time. Come in twice a week. Learn by observing. That night, Hannah stared at her bedroom ceiling, sleep refusing to come. For the first time in years, she didn't feel stuck. She felt scared, but it was the good kind of scared. The kind that comes just before something new begins. Hannah's first days at the firm were quiet. She mostly handled schedules, answered phones, and observed meetings from the back of the room. Everything felt foreign, the jargon, the sleek offices, the way people casually mentioned things like mergers and quarterly reports. She felt like a ghost in someone else's dream. But she paid attention. Every coffee run became a chance to listen in on hallway chatter. Every spreadsheet she printed revealed more than numbers, it showed priorities, pressure points, power dynamics. Evelyn noticed. After a week, she handed Hannah a thick binder and said, "Read this. It's dry, but it's our company's core." Hannah read every page twice. She started staying after hours, learning the internal systems, memorizing client names and patterns. Slowly, her confidence grew. She wasn't just refilling water glasses anymore, she was learning how to navigate a different kind of table. And though her nameplate still read assistant, inside, something stronger was taking root. 3 months into the job, an unexpected email landed in Hannah's inbox. Evelyn had included her on a client pitch scheduled for Friday. "Need your help with the prep," it read. Hannah stared at the screen, heart pounding. She felt unqualified, unready, but something in her also whispered, maybe this is the moment. In the days that followed, she worked tirelessly. She learned the client's history, double-checked all data, practiced transitions in her head until she dreamed in bullet points. When the meeting finally arrived, Evelyn began the presentation, smooth as ever. Then halfway through, she turned to Hannah. "Tell them about the competitor analysis you compiled." Hannah stood, palms sweating, voice trembling for the first few seconds. But then something shifted. She found her rhythm. When she sat down, one of the clients smiled. "That was the clearest explanation I've heard all month." Hannah barely heard the rest of the meeting. Her mind clung to that one sentence, the first real validation in years. With success came visibility, and with visibility came whispers. Some employees started questioning how a former waitress had landed such a central role. "Evelyn's charity case," one woman muttered in the hallway. "She's not even qualified," said another. Hannah heard them all. She smiled politely and said nothing. But when the office emptied each evening, she stayed late, diving deeper into project reports, practicing presentations alone in the empty boardroom. She was determined to prove that she didn't just belong, she could lead. One afternoon, Evelyn stopped by her desk unexpectedly. "You know," she said calmly, "they used to whisper about me too. Said I was too soft, too inexperienced. It stopped when they realized I was always 5 steps ahead." She looked Hannah straight in the eyes. "Don't let the noise distract you. Keep building." That night, Hannah walked home in the rain without an umbrella. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel wet or cold. She felt strong. She was beginning to remember who she had always been even before Dylan tried to convince her otherwise. When Evelyn called Hannah into her office one Thursday morning, she assumed it was about a scheduling issue. But instead, Evelyn slid a new contract across the table. "You're now officially our new project manager," she said. The title felt surreal in Hannah's hands. She smiled, thanked Evelyn, and kept it together until she got home. There, in the dim light of her tiny kitchen, the panic set in. Her chest tightened. The old voice returned, "You're not good enough. You don't belong." The next morning, she forced herself out of bed, dressed, and went to the office. Her hands trembled as she logged into the new system. A team of 6 now reported directly to her, and their eyes held expectation. The pressure was suffocating, but instead of letting it crush her, she took a deep breath and leaned on what she knew: grace under fire. Just like at the diner. Chaos didn't scare her. She'd just never worn heels while walking through it before. On the day of her first team meeting, Hannah arrived early, arranging materials with care. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. When the team filed in, she could feel their hesitation. One of them, a sharp analyst named Jordan, seemed particularly unimpressed. He whispered something to the colleague beside him. Hannah noticed. She stood, steadied herself, and said, "I know some of you wonder why I'm here. I used to serve pancakes and coffee. But I also know how to manage pressure, how to listen, how to deliver." There was a long silence. Then, she added, "Experience doesn't always come with titles. Sometimes it comes with pain. I didn't climb the usual ladder, I built a new one." That changed the air. Jordan raised an eyebrow, then slowly nodded. No one interrupted her again. That meeting marked a shift. Not just for them, but for her. For the first time, Hannah wasn't just proving herself to others. She was finally convincing herself too. 2 months later, Evelyn approached Hannah with an urgent folder in hand. "A major client specifically asked for you. They want your insight on the Harmon-Tech proposal." Hannah blinked. Harmon-Tech was one of the firm's top-tier partners, responsible for nearly 20% of revenue. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Evelyn smiled. "Because last month, you caught a flaw in their rollout strategy no one else noticed. They trust you now." That night, Hannah worked through dinner, rereading every contract clause, every market analysis. She wasn't just trying to get it right, she wanted to anticipate every possible failure. When she presented to the Harmon-Tech board 2 days later, the room was tense. But she delivered her proposal with clarity and resolve. When she finished, the CEO leaned back in his chair and said, "Finally, someone who speaks our language without the fluff." Hannah walked out of that room taller than she had ever felt before. The following quarter, Hannah traveled with Evelyn to attend a regional business conference held at a luxury hotel. She was scheduled to lead a panel on strategic adaptation in mid-sized firms. As she entered the conference room, flipping through her notes, her breath caught. Sitting at the table, casually flipping a pen, was Dylan. Her ex-husband. His badge read Caldwell and Myers, legal counsel. Her heart skipped. He looked up, blinked, and visibly froze. He stood, trying to mask his surprise with a smirk. "Well, this is unexpected." Hannah held her gaze. "Is it?" she replied coolly. The next hour passed like slow thunder. She led the discussion with calm authority, all while feeling his eyes on her. She didn't stumble. She didn't flinch. And when the panel ended, several attendees approached to compliment her clarity. Dylan lingered nearby, unsure whether to approach. But she had already turned to Evelyn, collected her notes, and walked out. Later that evening, at the hotel bar, Hannah and Evelyn sat reviewing the day's events when a young associate from Harmon-Tech stopped by to offer compliments. Just as he left, Dylan appeared. "Can we talk?" he asked, clearly uneasy. Evelyn gave Hannah a glance, her expression unreadable, then stood and walked away. Dylan sat down, fumbling with his watch. "I didn't expect to see you here, like this." You've changed. Hannah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. No, Dylan. I haven't changed. I've just stopped hiding who I was always capable of becoming. He looked down, then back at her. You were never this polished before. Her voice was steady. No, I was surviving. And when you left, I had to learn how to live. This version of me was born the day you walked away. He opened his mouth, but she'd already stood up. Have a good evening, she said. And with that, she walked away, again, only this time on her own terms. 2 weeks after the conference, a cream-colored envelope arrived at Hannah's office. Her assistant handed it over with a curious glance. The return address read the Caldwells. She opened it slowly. Another formal invitation, this time to a private family dinner hosted by Dylan and his new wife, Ashley. No note. Just a time, date, and address. The event was described as an evening of reconnection and celebration. Hannah stared at the card for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or be offended. Later that night, she replayed the scene at the hotel, Dylan's stiff attempt at conversation, his visible discomfort, and his inability to look her in the eye. The invitation made no sense. Why reach out now? What did he gain from pulling her back into his polished world? Evelyn, when told, raised an eyebrow. Go, she said simply. But don't go for him. Go for yourself. That was the push Hannah needed. She pulled her red dress from the back of the closet, the one she had never worn, and smiled to herself. If they wanted to see her, they would. While Hannah prepared quietly, across town in a pristine kitchen, Dylan and Ashley were finishing the guest list. You really invited her? Ashley asked, pouring wine. Dylan nodded. I want her to see how far we've come. She clung to me like dead weight. It's time she saw the difference. Ashley smirked, adjusting the diamond necklace at her throat. It'll be good for her. Maybe now she'll understand what success really looks like. They arranged every detail meticulously, designer plates, imported wine, background music selected by a professional DJ. Let's show her what elegance actually feels like, Ashley added. They believed they were preparing a performance Hannah couldn't possibly match. What they didn't know was that she was walking into that room not to be measured by their world, but to reveal how much she had already outgrown it. The night of the dinner, Hannah arrived precisely on time. She stepped out of the black car Evelyn insisted she take and walked up the stone path to the massive front door. Her red dress, sleek, timeless, caught the light as she moved. When Ashley opened the door, her smile faltered for a second. You look different, she said. Thank you, Hannah replied, with a calm smile. Inside, soft jazz played, and glasses clinked. Dylan approached, his expression unreadable. As guests mingled, Hannah stood with quiet confidence, answering questions about her work without boasting. Dylan tried to undermine her with subtle jabs, "You're still doing the assistant thing?" But she remained composed. Actually, she replied, I'm the chief operating officer now. The words landed like stone in water, rippling through the small crowd. Dylan blinked, clearly not expecting that. Ashley tightened her grip on her wine glass. The room grew tense. But Hannah just sipped her drink, unbothered. Later, during dinner, Dylan stood to make a toast. To progress, he said, raising his glass. To the people we once knew, and the people they've become. His tone carried a false warmth, laced with mockery. He added, some of us took the long road. Others found shortcuts. A few guests chuckled politely. Hannah didn't flinch. She stared into her glass, letting the silence fill the space his ego demanded. Ashley leaned over and whispered, "Must feel surreal to sit at this table again, huh?" Hannah turned to her, calm and clear. "It feels peaceful. Because I know I don't need to prove anything to anyone here." Just then, Evelyn entered, fashionably late, and heads turned. "So sorry," she said smoothly. "Traffic. I never miss a good performance." She locked eyes with Dylan. Or a better ending. The room went quiet. Ashley, not recognizing Evelyn, leaned over and whispered, "Who is she?" Hannah replied, "My boss. CEO of Anderson Strategic." Ashley's eyes widened. "Wait. Anderson? That's the firm managing Dylan's client deal, right?" Hannah nodded slowly. "Yes. And I signed off on the final terms." The blood drained from Dylan's face. Suddenly, all the grandeur of the evening shrank beneath the weight of reality. Guests began exchanging glances, some whispering, others watching in silence. Evelyn, now seated beside Hannah, smiled gently. "Your COO is doing a fantastic job, by the way. Sharp eye for contracts. Saved us millions last quarter." The words landed like thunder. Dylan tried to smile, but his lips twitched. Ashley stared at her plate, visibly shaken. Hannah, composed as ever, took a sip of her water and whispered, just loud enough for Dylan to hear, "Funny how tables turn, isn't it?" The weight of Evelyn's words echoed through the dining room like a dropped glass on marble. Dylan's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against his plate. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Everyone at the table knew what had just happened. Not only had Dylan tried to humiliate Hannah, but he'd done it in front of the very person who held his professional future in her hands. Ashley, sensing the growing embarrassment, forced a smile. "Well, how lovely. What a small world." But her voice cracked, betraying her nerves. Dylan cleared his throat, but the charm he once wielded like a sword now sounded hollow. "It's good to see you doing well, Hannah." She met his gaze, unwavering. "You said once I'd never make it without you. Turns out I was only just beginning." He looked away, exposed and powerless. With every course that followed, the energy at the table shifted. Guests stopped talking to Dylan and began asking Hannah about her work, her story, how she got where she was. She answered humbly, offering insights, not revenge. But the power dynamic had fully reversed. Dylan, once the star, now sat like a dimmed chandelier, still hanging, but unnoticed. Evelyn smiled as she observed the scene. "Funny," she said aloud, "how often people underestimate the ones who build themselves from the ground up. That kind of strength never fades, it multiplies." Ashley excused herself shortly after, muttering something about a phone call. Dylan sat stiffly, unable to regain the crowd, watching as the woman he discarded became the center of every meaningful conversation in the room. When dessert was served, Evelyn stood to say a few words. "I've worked with many professionals, but very few have the clarity, resilience, and integrity that Hannah brings to the table. She's more than a COO, she's proof that setbacks don't define you. How you rise does." The applause that followed was sincere, unforced. Hannah thanked her softly and stood, her hands steady, her voice clear. "I didn't come here tonight for revenge," she said. I came to remind myself that the version of me who once sat silent at this table no longer exists. That woman was afraid. She's gone now. I'm not angry, I'm free. Her words didn't sting. They illuminated. And with that, she stepped back into her seat, having reclaimed something deeper than respect, her own voice. After coffee was served, Hannah rose, gathered her clutch, and turned to Evelyn. "Shall we?" Evelyn nodded, standing as well. They thanked the staff, said polite goodbyes, and began to head out. Dylan stood, his voice quiet. "Wait," he said, reaching slightly toward her. Hannah stopped, turned. "What is it?" she asked, not cold, just finished. "Do you think we could talk sometime? Privately?" She smiled, the kind of smile that holds both memory and mercy. "There's nothing left to say, Dylan. You made your choices. And now, so have I." Then she turned and walked out the door into the evening air. Each step away from that house felt like the closing of a heavy door, not with anger, but with clarity. She didn't need to burn the past. She had simply outgrown it. Back in their car, Evelyn looked over. "How do you feel?" Hannah exhaled, a long, calm breath. Lighter. That night, after a warm bath and a cup of tea, her phone lit up. Unknown number. She answered out of instinct. "Hello?" It was Ashley. Her voice was different, not sharp, not cruel. "I just wanted to say, you handled yourself with grace tonight. I don't know who I thought you were, but I was wrong." There was silence for a beat. Then Ashley continued, "He talks about you sometimes. I used to think he hated you. Now I wonder if he just couldn't face who he was around you." Hannah listened, but didn't respond. Some truths don't need answers, only time. "Thank you," Ashley added, "for showing me what dignity looks like." Hannah hung up, set the phone down, and stared at the ceiling with a faint smile. That night, she slept without dreams, because the waking world had finally changed. A few days later, Hannah returned to the diner where everything had once begun. The booths were the same, the smell of syrup still hung in the air. A young waitress approached her shyly, her eyes wide. "Are you Hannah?" Hannah nodded, surprised. The girl grinned. "You're in that business article, Anderson's Rising Star." She looked genuinely amazed. "I used to think I'd never get out of here either." Hannah smiled and handed her a tip folded inside a business card. "Keep believing. Every shift here is training for something bigger, you just don't see it yet." The girl stared at the card, then at her. "You think I could be like you?" Hannah paused. "No," she said gently. "You'll be better. You'll be you." She left a generous tip on the table and walked out, not with regret, but with reverence for the place that had once held her when no one else did. 1 week later, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note in careful print. "You don't know me, but I'm Dylan's son. I'm 15. I saw what happened at that dinner. My dad's never looked that quiet before. I just wanted to say thank you, for not yelling, for staying calm. My mom said you used to love him. I don't know why he lost that. I hope someday I grow up to be the kind of person people listen to, like they listen to you." Hannah's fingers trembled as she reread the letter. It was the kind of message that didn't seek a reply, only understanding. She folded it carefully, placed it in a small wooden box on her bookshelf, and sat in silence. The weight of the boy's words settled in her chest, not heavy, but warm. She realized then that some legacies aren't built in boardrooms or contracts, but in the quiet moments when someone, somewhere, sees your worth and chooses to carry that forward. In the following months, Evelyn and Hannah launched a mentorship initiative for women who had been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside. They held their first workshop in a rented space above a bakery. 20 seats. All filled. Most women were waitresses, single mothers, immigrants, and recent divorcees. All carried stories behind tired eyes. Hannah stood in front of them and shared hers, not with drama, but with truth. She spoke of shame, of doubt, of the quiet fear of being invisible. Then she spoke of rediscovery, growth, and the strength of starting over. "You are not behind," she told them. "You are being refined." That line was quoted on dozens of social posts the next day. Over time, what started as one workshop became a quarterly event, then a national program. And in every session, Hannah reminded them, they were never small, they were just underestimated. Years passed, and one morning, while waiting in line at a corner coffee shop, Hannah heard a familiar voice behind her. "Dylan." He looked older, tired in a way that came from within. He offered a small, uncertain smile. "Hannah," he said. She turned, her expression neutral. "Hi." They exchanged a few polite words, weather, work, life. Then he grew quiet and finally asked, "Do you hate me?" She looked at him, not with resentment, but with clarity. "No," she said. "You were a chapter. But not the whole story." He nodded, quietly digesting her words. "You always had more strength than I gave you credit for." Hannah smiled faintly. "I didn't need your credit. I just needed to stop asking for it." With that, her name was called, and she picked up her coffee, walking out of the shop without looking back. At a company-wide event held at a grand hotel ballroom, Hannah was introduced as the keynote speaker. The room filled with professionals, mentors, and men's, people she once admired from afar, and others who now looked up to her. She stepped to the stage, her voice steady, her presence commanding, yet warm. "We often believe the world defines us by our lowest moment," she began. "But I learned that power is not taken, it's reclaimed." She shared lessons not from textbooks, but from living, humility, persistence, grace under fire. When she finished, the applause didn't stop. As she stepped off the stage, one woman from the audience stood and said aloud, "You didn't just survive. You changed the room." Hannah smiled deeply, her heart full. For years, she'd served others from the side of the table. Now, she sat at the head, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned every step that led her there.